Started. Good evening, everybody. I am Linda Levan. I'm the Executive Director of Southern Lit Alliance, and I'm delighted you are here to join us with Ron Rash. I do want to take just a few minutes to tell you about Southern Lit Alliance. I know there are people on here tonight who haven't participated with our programs before, and so many of you have been so kind to donate to help this. I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. We're here in Chattanooga, and this is a virtual series that we have done and changed. It's called the Southbound Author Lecture Series. And usually we have them in our building and have authors come. But with COVID, that has changed, and we are doing these virtual. I really want to thank Henderson, Hutchison, and McCullough, who are accountants in town, who are sponsoring our event and have been a huge help. So a little bit about our mission. We are providing engaging literary arts experiences to encourage passionate readers and writers. And we do a little of both of all that. We have several programs you might have heard of. One of the best known is the Southward Literary Festival, and that's where we bring in the Fellowship of Southern Writers, which Ron is a member of. And we do that every other year, except we had to cancel it this year. We will be having that again. We're hoping for next fall, with things maybe looking up with the vaccine, that we might be able to do that, but we will have it as soon as possible. But some other things that we do is we have a Young Southern Student Writers Contest, which is for kindergarten through 12th grade, and we have almost 4,000 submissions in poetry or prose, and they're all read and judged by UTC professors and graduate students. And we give out about 350 medals to some of the best ones. So that's been a great program we've done for years. We also have a young adult genre festival that we had in September, and we did that virtually and successfully. And we're doing creative writing workshops. We're going to do one starting the 24th. And have done some things like recently the Moccasin Bend Hospital. We have done a book drive to help stock up their library. I think it's especially important during COVID that there's so many people dealing with mental health issues. And we collected actually 527 books this month. So we're super excited to be able to offer that to them. So if I can get back to you. Just a little bit. Thank you all for your donation. That's some of what your support is going to. So with that, I would like to welcome Ron Rash this evening. Ron, we've had lucky enough to have here in town a few times. I think the real silver lining with this pandemic has been that we've been able to have virtual meetings with some of the greatest authors that maybe not be able to make it to Chattanooga, and Ron is certainly one of them. I have found it really interesting. If you've been on some of these virtual events, you get to see the authors where they live and something about them. And I did participate in the Southern Festival of Books and got to hear Ron Rash and George Singleton. And I will say, I learned that Ron loves Subway. There were at least 3 Subway cups in his office. And I also learned from George Singleton what his dad was going to name him, but I won't embarrass him with that further. But that makes a lot of fun. So Ron is with us. You are maybe familiar with one of his best-selling books and award-winning books, Serena, but he has also had some wonderful other short stories and poetry that have won awards. He's the winner of the Penn Faulkner Award and finalist, and has written novels such as The Risen, Above the Waterfall. And also he won in the 2010 Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award from Burning Bright. So really well-rounded and writing lots of things. He is a professor of Appalachian Cultural Studies in Western Carolina University. So we aren't too far away, but I thank you, Ron, for joining us. And I have some questions, but everyone feel free to jump in on the chat and put your questions in there since you're on mute, and we will try to read those. So, Ron, you have the new book. Let's see if we can see this, In the Valley. And it is a collection of 9 short stories and a novella, which is based on Serena. And so tell me, what got you thinking about going back to Serena again and exploring that more?
Well, I didn't want to. I thought living 3 years with her was enough, but sometimes I don't really have much control over what my characters demand of me, and some of these characters were demanding, particularly a character named Ross, who was a minor character in Serena, but his story had always been compelling to me. I thought there was a lot more to it, and I think some things that were happening, particularly with what was happening, once again, the threat to the national parks, certain environmental regulations being, destroyed or, taken off some protected lands. I really, I think that was just an area I felt like I needed, once again, wanted to address how easily lost a national park or just a forest can be. So that, I think all those things kind of drew me back. But I knew I didn't want to write a novel. I just didn't want to write a sequel. I just never have wanted to repeat myself that way. But I thought a novella would work, and I'd never written one, and I love the form. And since I'd never done one, I just wanted to try to see if I could, and I found out it's a lot harder than I thought it might be. Very, very difficult, and I do like it, but it makes me appreciate the people who do it very well. Jim Harris and Dennis Johnson, writers such as that. And so, so I came back. I've been back writing some stories, so this gave me a chance to publish those as well. And I love writing short stories. And so all those things came together. But it also had to start with Serena. And I did think one aspect of the book that would be interesting would be seeing her come back completely free. I mean, no longer has a husband. I mean, she reigns without any restraints now. The law is no longer a threat to her. There's no husband to drag her down, as she makes clear, and so she's really free to do what she wants, and that
she does.
And she does, she does. But I also wanted to make the book not just be kind of a tag on to Serena. So I really worked hard on that, and I was still not satisfied with it until really about 6 or 7 months ago, and I realized that. If I could, I started adding, I thought, well, if I could make this valley seem like a kind of Noah's Ark, except an ironic Noah's Ark, where instead of the animals coming into the safety of the ark, they slowly leave it. That gave me a structure I felt worked and made the book more self-contained. And that's when I really felt good about it, when that came about. But I thought I'd just read 2 pages to show Serena coming back into West North Carolina. And that was kind of fun to write because I've always thought of her as being a very Wagnerian character, and just the idea of her descending goddess-like out of the heavens. I thought that would be a good way to bring her back. And also, I've always admired Martha Gellhorn, who was a very strong woman in her own right in the 1930s and 40s. She was a war correspondent during World War II, and very much like Serena, tall, very forthright, very brave, and in her own way, pretty ruthless. But this is the start when she comes back. When Serena Pemberton stepped out of the Commodore seaplane in July 1931, a small but fervent contingent of reporters and photographers awaited her. Except for the pilot, she was alone. Those who would accompany her to the logging camp, both beast and human, had arrived by ship the night before. They were already on the train that would take them from Miami to North Carolina. all except for her minion Galloway, who procured an automobile to drive Serena to the station. As the metal ramp was ready, Galloway positioned himself beside the bottom step. He was short and wiry, shabbily dressed, a purple stump protruding from one sleeve. His cameras flashed mere inches from his face. He did not blink. As Serena descended, the first question shouted at her addressed the rumors surrounding her husband's death. For a moment, it didn't appear she would answer, but when her booted feet settled securely on the question was asked again, but with a caveat. Had she loved her husband? I loved my husband, but one always learns from disappointments. But what of his deaths, Mrs. Pemberton, and what of so many others of your acquaintance, the reporter asked. Logging is a dangerous business, she answered. Galloway was in front of her now, but Serena, almost a head taller, was clearly visible. He cleared a path as more questions came. Would she continue to fight against the national park? And would she address the rumor that she was connected to the recent demise of Horace Kephart, the park's chief advocate? Did she oppose the Davis-Bacon Act? Why risk a transatlantic enterprise when she and her late husband had achieved so much in the States? Galloway opened the DeSoto's passenger door. Serena was about to get in when the sole woman in the group, the reporter for the New Republic, stepped close. She was very young, but like Serena, tall and blonde. When will you have achieved all your ambitions, Mrs. Pemberton, she asked, as others jostled around them. When the world and my will are one, Serena answered.
That'll whet your appetite.
Well, I hope. Yeah, I had some fun with this book. I think, one thing that I did that was probably in some ways the most fun for me was I have the longer speaking in a Appalachian dialect, but I have them also speaking largely in iambic pentameter. And I thought that would be kind of an interesting, I hope the reader doesn't catch it. But I think the reader's ear will catch it. But, sometimes writers get bored and they have to amuse themselves. So you do things like that, or little in jokes where you put somebody's last name in, like George Singleton or something.
Well, you mentioned pentameters. You have done a lot of poetry. You've done a lot of short stories, novels. Which one do you like, and how is it different to write different genres like that?
Yeah, well, they all have their challenges, and I love short story is my favorite form. That's the one I feel like, as I think most writers I know who do write different genres would agree that it's the most difficult. Just about every writer I know who writes novels and short stories says that, and so yeah, that's the one I enjoy the most. It's the one I find most challenging, and but I love to read it. There's so many good writers, and I think I've been very lucky growing up where I did that. I was able to watch Robert Morgan and Fred Chappell show that you could do this. You didn't have to be just a short story writer. You didn't have to just be a novelist. And other writers, it seems interesting that Kentucky and North Carolina writers seem to be the ones who want to do this or do it the most. I think of Jesse Stewart and Wendell Berry and writers such as that. Robert Penn Warren, to a degree. He didn't write a lot of short stories, but I just enjoy that. I enjoy using, and I think I learned something from writing poetry that will help me write better fiction, and the same way. So it's all kind of fun.
So Sherry is asking, what makes a short story so difficult to write?
I think I would say you have to give in many ways, not totally, the satisfaction of a novel, in the sense that once the reader finishes the short story, the reader doesn't feel the necessity of any further, taking the story any further. That there's a sense of completeness that Very often it's a sense that a character has revealed himself or herself in a single moment that kind of resonates out. So I think, but also it really takes the concision of a poem. Very often that involves what I call, I don't, there's probably a more sophisticated term for it, visual rhythms, where certain images recur, I mean, almost like refrains, the tautness of it. So you have all of those challenges and just very little room for error. That's what's amazing. And the short story writers I admire the most, Flannery O'Connor probably does this as well as any writer. There's just not a sentence in there that isn't important. So I think that in a sense you have to bring everything, not everything, but a lot of what you have to bring from a successful novel and also from a successful poem.
Yes, I really enjoyed the short stories in this book. There was such a variety, but it did really feel like I had read something longer when I got done. I wondered, were you in the process of writing this when the pandemic hit, and how did that change? And did you pick stories based, because some of them, the characters, they're in extreme situations, it seems like, in every short story, and some of them really mirror what we're dealing with today. So did you pick them based upon that, or was that just the way the luck landed?
No, I think I'm glad you picked up on that, because I was very conscious of that. The placement of the stories, and yeah, I think this book, I did this also in Burning Bright, but I think in some ways it's even more evident here, because in Burning Bright I had some moments of humor, or a couple of stories that I felt largely humorous. But yeah, I think as I was putting the stories together, I realized that COVID was here. I'm talking about like, March and April as I was putting the book together, deciding which stories to put in. And also it affected in the Valley, because Ross's family has been greatly affected by the 1918 flu epidemic. So certainly I was trying to give a sense of that. But I would like to hope that the book ultimately is about people being in really tough situations. And I've said this quote before, but it's a quote I love. William Faulkner said he thought most people were a little bit better than their circumstances to allow. And I believe that. And so I hope that in these stories, we see people struggling. We see people doing things that certainly are disturbing, but we also, I think, see a certain amount of resilience, certain amount of heroism. And I was very pleased to end the book with a very hopeful story, at least as hopeful as Ron Rash gets, where a grandfather saved his son, because my grandson's now about 7 months old. And,
Awesome.
I wanted to, I think that also, and I think that had an impact on the book too. I think the characters and the characters in the Valley, I think what we see Ross do is the kind of selflessness that is humanity at its best.
Yes, the characters certainly are not perfect. You see just how very human they all are, and the circumstances. The one Neighbors, which takes place after the Civil War, really is a fragmented society and dealing with trying to unite. And I see such similarities in what our country is dealing with in many aspects.
Oh yeah, well that story was as much about the present as the past, and I mean that's why I put it first. I really wanted to show, the cost of that kind of tribalism, and yeah, that was very conscious to put that in, and also, once again, kind of showing some of the effects of I didn't want to, a little bit about the drug problem, but once again, showing not the perpetrators as much, well, indirectly, just kind of showing the effects of that, but also, some moments of heroism and decency. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's the world we live in.
So you have a couple of short stories where the characters are dealing with emotional issues or mental health issues, and mention one of them is on Klonopin and other medications. Are you showing that they're doing the best they can in the circumstances? Is there thoughts around how we as a society are using pharmaceuticals, or kind of give me some background on your thoughts behind that? Because I could see it going several different directions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just horrified at what happened with these pharmaceutical companies, particularly Sacklers.
Mhm.
They're paying. No one's going to jail. I mean, they murdered. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but they certainly had a huge effect on probably what now 2/3 of a million people, 700, 800,000 people died of opioids, and I just find that really distressful that our country would. First of all, I mean, if you read, there's a book by a woman named Macy about the opioid epidemic. And when you read that and you realize how Democrats, Republicans, all sorts of people are involved in letting that go forward. And it's just, yeah, it's horrific. And I have a story that actually kind of deals with that. A father trying to get a degree of revenge, which I don't condone, but I think his grief is understandable in that story. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm just dealing with people, and the fact that these people are taking these drugs. I mean, they're trying to find a way to survive.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It seems like they're just doing the best they can, and this is what they're dealing with. In each of them, some of them may take Klonopin, but they're all just doing the best they can in the circumstances they find themselves in. So I wanted to read a comment from KB Valentine. He says, "When I read your novels and short stories, I can tell you are a poet. Your prose lines are full of lyricism and imagery that I don't find in novelists who don't read or write poetry. I'm glad you cross genres to show it can be done and done well."
Well, that's nice. KB's a friend of mine. She's a very fine poet herself, so that's nice. That's a really nice compliment. But yeah, I want my language to hold up. I want the reader to get pleasure out of it. And I'd say the writers I admire most are writers that, and I do this very often. I'll just open up their books, and it's not so much I'm reading for plot or. I mean, I just open it up for the delight of the language, and the really good writers. Every page there's something that gives pleasure just in being said so well. I was teaching an Annie Proulx story a couple of weeks ago, and it just struck me again, just these lines that are just so beautiful. And I think that's one way that, literature is very often about very tough, stark situations, people in extreme circumstances. But I think what makes it bearable very often is the beauty of the language. I mean, when you read a Cormac McCarthy novel, I think sometimes that's a pretty dark place to go, but there's a delight in the language. Shakespeare certainly does this in his darkest plays, such as Macbeth and King Lear. There's still the beauty of the language. And I think that when you have that juxtaposition, we get the heartbreak, but also we get beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Sublime, we go into the sublime, and that's the area I'm most interested in. If I can get my reader there, then I've certainly accomplished what I want.
Well, I that brings to mind the short story in the book, The Belt, which just really hit my heart, about a grandfather who has his grandson and there's a flood, and how he saves his grandson and what goes on. The language really was so much part of that. So
Yeah,
your short stories are all different times and places. Did you have a plan for that? And how do you research about different time periods and look at doing stories on that?
Well, I do. I enjoy research, and I'm always going to get something wrong, and there'll be a reader who will write me and let me know, and that's okay. I mean, I'm doing the best I can. But actually, the belt, which is kind of interesting, that was actually based. The flood was that actually was a flood like that in 1918 in Western North Carolina. I mean, it's horrific. So that knowing that had happened, and certainly. Influence that story. But what I'm trying to do, and I've tried to do this with every collection, is I want my reader to be a little bit unmoored as far as time. Maybe to go from one story to the next, not quite sure where the reader is. I mean, as far as time, is this the 1930s? Is this 1865? Is this the present? And I'm not very good at explaining this, but I think it does something, that kind of unmooring, that as we weave through the history or through the time, I think it has a kind of, I hope it has a kind of aesthetic effect that adds to I think the sense of almost timelessness. Also, you're kind of kind of reminding us that these events have occurred and will reoccur. But more than that, I hope there's something just kind of going on with the reader's consciousness. Maybe I'm deluding myself, but I think there's something interesting there. So I do that, but I do like the idea of the reader being unmoored, and that's the best way I could probably say that.
Yeah, I say you definitely see the intentionality of what you're saying about moving back and forth, and how it does put you a little off guard before you start the next one.
Yeah.
Ryan has a question. He says, you once said that your grandmother gave you the phrase about a swimsuit not being enough to wad a shotgun.
Yeah.
I love that. How do those kinds of wonderful turns of phrase influence your character's dialogue? So many of them are in North Carolina in your stories, and that comes up.
Yeah. Well, I love folk languages, and I love. I was very lucky in that I spent so much time with my older relatives around Boone, North Carolina, and on a farm. My grandmother had a farm, and I spent a lot of time with her, and just hearing that language. But once again, I'm glad that was a good example of it. The memorable phrasing, and I've said this before, but. A lot of times people will think about a folk language or, Appalachian language and being unsophisticated. And sometimes, in the sense of maybe saying they was instead of they were, that kind of thing. But you also see a richness and a sophistication. And you see that most clearly with similes, because similes have to have two unalike things and have to be joined together. And to do that, you have to have a certain degree of intelligence, and also imagination, creativity. And so, I love those moments. Yeah, actually, it was my uncle said that girl hasn't got enough clothes on to wad a shotgun,
Okay.
which is, is pretty brilliant. I thought, I actually waited 3 novels to get that in. I knew I was going to finally had a character in my 3rd novel, The World Made Straight, who could say that. But
yeah, it seems those colloquialisms are really tied to different areas of the country. My grandmother always said, "You're mean as a cutworm." I never knew what cutworm was, except that ate your tomatoes. But yeah, those do go around.
Yeah, I've got one I haven't been able to use yet, but I'm going to use a mountain woman. Was older woman was talking about her husband's demise. And it happened while they were having sex. And she said, "I thought he was a coming, but he was a going." And I'm gonna have to get that one in. I'll get that one in. Maybe a couple more novels, but I'm gonna get that one in.
Yeah, I think you said that.
I've got that. So any writers out there, that's mine. So don't.
Yeah, we'll know it's yours, definitely. So I'm really struck about the allegory in your stories, and I see in the valley as well as another your short stories. There's some birds, a raven and an eagle, and the symbolism that is used. Do you like to use animals for the symbolism and tie that back to your ecological pursuits in your books?
Oh yeah, it's more organic. I don't want it to be. I'm always a little wary of the word symbol. I like resonance better. Just because I hope I think sometimes symbol sounds almost like it's stamped on. I know you're not using it that way, but I think sometimes it can be that way. But yeah, I mean, you want to use everything you can to give the reader as much as possible. So. Yeah, deliberately picking a particular bird. I mean, in the valley, I wanted to have, the dove is the last bird to leave, and I think you could see how that would work with Noah's Ark. And yeah, I was very conscious of those things. And yeah, the richness. Yeah, and sometimes certain animals evoke certain. Yeah, they do have a certain symbolism that we all know. I mean, I think the eagle certainly. I think that, and in several ways, including the idea of America, and so. Yeah, I want that, but I always want it to feel like it comes out of the story, and it almost always does. I mean, it will not. It's not something like I say, well, I really want to put a chickadee into this book, or something. Yeah, it kind of rises out, and I don't know. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and I say, the more I write, the more mysterious it is. Where do these stories come from? I'm kind of a Jungian. I think they're kind of out there, and part of what we try to do as writers is maybe just tap into something that's out there. It always feels that way. But I realized when I was young, I kept trying to. I'd have an idea that I was going to write about this, and I found that just didn't work. And now I pretty much just kind of. Start out kind of blind. I might have a general idea of what's going to happen, but it very often changes. And I'm pretty content just to wander for a few drafts. Actually, I've been working on a new story, and I started it 3 years ago, and it died on me. I picked it up a couple of weeks ago, and it just suddenly I knew this is what I got to do, and where the real story was. So it's kind of an interesting process.
So another question, Robert he said, your work has been a gift for my dad and I to share, and he thanks you for that. He's wondering if you feel the Southeast is particularly, quote unquote, Christ haunted, and if so, how does that inform your work? How does that impact it?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, O'Connor, I think she might have coined that phrase about the South. That even if well, I mean, we've certainly still Christianity is here, but yeah, I think that sense of religion seems to be maintained. I certainly believe it true of my generation. Yeah, I think it tends to be, I don't. That certainly has influenced my work, religion, and my delving into it. And I think my religious, growing up in a very religious atmosphere, though I think what made the atmosphere I grew up in particularly interesting was that Christianity and pagan were kind of fused. My uncle would. During a drought time, he would be in church on Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night. But then he'd kill a black snake and put it on his wire fence, and it was kind of like he was going to anybody out there listening, So you had kind of this pagan belief, and then but I like being in mystery, and I mean religious mystery. Just the idea that there's something, that the world is mysterious, and I think that's a gift to a writer to feel that. So yeah, I'm very comfortable there, and you know, and that tension between doubt and faith, and I think all of those elements are important. But yeah, yeah, I think it seems South is changed and it's changing, but it seems to me that yeah, there's still I would say seems to be still Christ home.
Mhm. So, Colton has asked, you touched on this, but do you plot out your stories? You said you they change as they go, or
Yeah.
do you have a general idea, or does it completely take a whole nother road?
Yeah, usually the plot. I mean, and there are writers who do plot, and I'm just I'm not saying that the way I do it's superior. It's just best for me. But I may have a general idea. You know, I'd heard a story a little bit like that opening story of Neighbors about a woman who'd had to burn her own barn just to keep her, you know, during the Civil War, so people wouldn't know which side her husband was fighting on. But so I knew that there was a story there, but I didn't know where it would be. It wasn't in the place where I actually said it, and so yeah, as I say, I think when I really know I've got a story is when I start to hear a voice, not necessarily in dialogue, but I'm capturing, so I can hear it inside my head, and you know, and just about everything I write starts with an image. Serena started, all I had for that, I didn't have any plot. I just had an image of a woman on horseback. I knew she was very strong, very confident. And as I thought about her, I knew that someone was looking at her with both love and fear. So, and, you know, then it just kind of takes off. Now that also is, you know, causes me sometimes to make a lot of wrong turns where, you know, the Cove, I had to get rid of probably over 100 pages.
Ouch.
Yeah, you know, Serena had several really, you know, places that didn't work. I had to go back. So, you know, there's always that. I mean, to me, it's a little bit like having a block. You know, Michelangelo talked about the statue being completed statue being within the marble. You know, the block of marble. I'm not Michelangelo, but I kind of make myself believe if there's something pushing me this hard, these characters seem to be that interesting to me, that image, that there's something there. And whether that's true or not, objectively, I mean, or in reality, it's, I make myself believe that. And usually it'll work out. Sometimes it doesn't, but that's what works for me.
So Sherry asks, what do you do with those bits you take out? Do you use it as an idea for another story, or?
Yeah, sometimes though they just go. I mean, in the Cove, I had probably 30 pages about, and I've read about 10 books on jazz because I had a character in that book who's a German musician, and I had him in New York for a longer than the story really needed him to be, but I'd written about 30 pages and I had some good writing in it, or I felt was good, and some scenes, jazz scenes of what it would have been like to be in a New York nascent jazz. I mean, you're seeing the beginnings of jazz, and you know, him performing. But yeah, all that got, and I don't think I'll ever find a way to use that. But somebody, I can't remember who said this, but one writer said that you never, no matter if throw it away or not, every time you write, you're not wasting. It's not a waste because you're learning. Mm. So even if I threw away those 30 pages, I was still practicing. I was still, you know, and you know, and what I will do is I will occasionally have an image that I like so much that I know I'm going to use it. I'll use it later. The guy I like, for instance, in that jazz section I threw away, I had a character with the horn, and when he turned it, I said he looked like, you know, he put his horn behind his back like a bashful suitor, you know, at the door, you know.
Yeah, that's good.
I find a way to get that in somewhere, but yeah, but that's okay. I mean, you just have to accept that, or I do, that there are going to be sections, 100 pages, 150 pages sometimes that don't work. But
So Kathy's asking about your writing discipline. Do you have a time you write every day, or how do you find time, especially teaching?
yeah, well, I'm very Protestant. Yeah, I do. I've always been very. I mean, well, I think one thing. Whatever limitations I've had in talent, I'm at least obsessive enough to where I keep trying. But yeah, I pretty much for the last, I don't know, start when I was about 25, about 40 years, I've pretty much written every day. Not every day, but pretty much. And very often, 4, 6 to 8 hours, a lot of times 4 to 6. I mean, I still try to get in 4 or 5 a day. When I was really in my 40s, 50s, I was probably up to about 6, 8 hours a day. If I'm really working on something, if something really grabs me, Serena, I was writing about 12 hours a day for 6 weeks when I wrote the first draft. But yeah, and I tell my students that it's the days you'd rather stick pencils in your eyes than write that make you a writer. But I have really good writer friends who don't believe that. They say, well, I'm just not going to write for a couple of weeks. When I'm ready, when I want to write, it'll be there. And so I think, once again, that's me. But I do think for me, it's important to really be at it every day, to make it a natural part of my day, the same way of my exercising, or it's part of the rhythm of my day, and I don't feel right if I don't do it. So, that's okay. Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to share about In the Valley, or?
Well, I'd just like to say hi to John and Esther out there. I see them. And John was very generous. He's been a great supporter of my work, and very kind to me, and good friend. So it's nice to see him at least on Zoom, and Esther with him. No, I'm just glad that we're able to do this. I hope we can, next year we get to meet in person, because that's always such a great event. Mm-hmm. And it's a chance, I think the best thing is it's a chance to see writers I would not get to see otherwise. Every 2 years I would get to see people that I didn't get to see before, and it was always a great honor. I mean, to be part of it, the fellowship, because the writers I admired so much, Walker Percy, I did my master's thesis on. Eudora Welty, huge influence on my writing, and Robert Penn Lawrence. So all those writers, Ernest Gaines, had a huge impact on me.
So I have a request for you to read a little bit more to close things out. Anything from your short stories, or anything you want to read?
Well, I didn't plan this, but I'm going. Maybe I can. Y'all want a gloomy one? I'll show you. Serena goes after a guy. Maybe I can. That's kind of awful. But let's see. Meeks. Okay, yeah. All right. This is Serena's chasing a man named Meeks who's tried to get away from her, and he thinks he's gotten away, but unfortunately, we see that he didn't. Meeks took 2 slow backward steps. As he turned to run, Mrs. Pemberton came out of the woods. He leaped off the bank and landed amid the boulder-strewn shallows of the river. He stumbled forward and dove underwater. Breaking the surface, Meeks found himself neck deep in the river. He turned and saw Serena on horseback in the shallows, her left hand circling as if beckoning him to return. Then something floated toward him in the air. Directly overhead, the lariat stalled, dropped into the water. For a moment it lay flaccid. Then the rope snapped taut around his neck. Meeks tried to free the noose, legs kicking to keep from going under. Serena secured the rope to the pommel. She turned the horse and Meeks was jerked forward, dragged head first towards shore where he saw Galloway, knife at the ready. The water shallowed and Meeks' right shoulder slammed against a boulder. As it did, the rope jerked his head sideways and the neck bone snapped. Meeks' eyes were still open, but they did not see Galloway cut free the noose, unclasp the suspenders of linen pants. Nor did Meeks see the henchman's one hand wield a hickory branch like a peavy stick, prod his body out of the shallows into the river's main current. And as Meeks drifted downstream, his eyes, though looking upward, did not see the morning sun when its angled beams gilded the river. He did not see in that same sky the first dark forms assembling, then slowly kelpling downward, somber-suited ferrymen who asked of him no coin as they accompanied him on his passage.
Yes, quite a moment in that novella. Well, thank you, Ron. I can't thank you enough for your time and willingness to be with us. And we wish you all the success in your new book. And I appreciate you doing this for all of us in COVID, keeping us going.
I'm glad to do it. It was a good time. Thank you. So I hope everyone has a good evening.
Yeah. Thank everyone. Good night.
Good night.